So how about war, huh?
How about war?
I'm on the fence.
Good idea, bad idea? I don't know.
Who are we to say?
I like war movies.
War movies, yeah. That's I guess.
Yeah, that's weird. See, I don't like, heist movies, but I'm pro like robberies in real life.
Yeah.
Chris has the horrors of war going on in his house.
Yeah, you can hear it.
Yeah.
Yeah, they should be going to sleep soon, but
No problem.
We always have barking dogs. We've had shrieking cats. We had a guest with like pet ferrets one time that were screaming in the background.
Well, that's what it sounded like.
We've had motorcycles and
I think this is all just stuff that was in the background for me, actually. This is literally all stuff that is my fault.
yeah, you're right.
Yeah.
It's always
There you go.
it's always Seth's house. Yeah.
And that was just one episode too. All those noises.
Yeah, we'll add some shelling and gunfire sound effects in
That's
the background
perfect.
anyway, just to
that's perfect.
create the mood. Yeah.
The jungle of war has animals, right? The jungle, right? Screeching, howling.
Yeah, and children. This is all about children.
It's perfect. Children screaming.
Yeah, there you go. Hey everyone, Tony from Unwatchables here with a quick bit of housekeeping. As you're listening to our Horrors of War episode, you may notice the sound of distant explosions in the background as shells crash down on the enemy front, and you may assume that this is just another example of our signature commitment to immersing you in the dark subject matter of this week's Unwatchable films. And as much as we'd like to take credit for that, the sounds you're hearing are actually just all of our neighbors setting off fireworks, because we scheduled this recording over 4th of July weekend. So we apologize for the distraction, and we hope that next time you think of lighting up an unsanctioned firework, you'll stop and think not just of the elderly neighbor lying awake all night or the nervous dog whimpering in the corner, but of the humble podcaster working tirelessly to bring you the unlistenable content that you crave. And we promise that next year we'll take the weekend off and just go to a cookout or something. So thanks for understanding, and as always, thanks for listening.
Hello and welcome to Unwatchables, your first stop to find out exactly what a film's about to put you through before it's too late. I am Marc Dottavio.
I'm Seth Troyer.
And today we're discussing two films about the Nazi occupation of Europe in World War II as witnessed through the eyes of an orphan child. Those films are 1985's harrowing Soviet classic Come and See, and the controversial 2019 adaptation of Jerzy Kosiński's endurance test, The Painted Bird. All right. That's The Painted Bird there. That's in the background. That sounds suspiciously like Seth.
Stop painting me.
But
the birds
first,
will eat me.
Yeah, that is too bad. This is the
we'll
Painted
get to
Seth.
that. We're getting ahead
we'll get
We're
there.
getting ahead of things.
So I want to start out by introducing our very special guest today, which is Chris, who you may know if you're on Letterboxd as Ziglet Mir. That's Ziglet _MIR. Chris, so nice to have you.
Thanks for having me, guys. I appreciate it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, this will be exciting.
I hope so.
Finally. We've, both, I don't know, we've been Letterboxd friends for a while. I remember we wrote about the same movie once.
Yep.
Did little
Twins.
collab.
Yes, we did. We did a small one. Yes.
Yep.
Those remains of the day.
And it was Remains of the Day. That's right. Yeah. Another, very different view of World War II.
Yes.
But we're kind of back to the topic now.
It's appropriate. Appropriate.
Yeah, for sure. So we invited you on for a real fun episode because these movies are a real barrel of laughs.
Had you seen these before?
So I've only seen Come and See, and I saw it. Must have been about a dozen years ago. I was 17 or 18 at the time, and I remember it being very effective for my movie-going experience. It stuck with me for a while. It definitely met all the praise and all that jazz. So it was a really good movie. I liked it the first time around. So it was going to be a very interesting experience seeing it again for the second time.
All right. And then it was your first time with The Painted Bird?
First time with The Painted Bird. That's correct.
All right. Well, that was exactly my experience. I'd seen Come and See a while ago and then got a chance to revisit it for this. And,
everybody saw Come and See. They came and saw it already. I've never seen it.
It was your first time.
Okay.
I had heard about it. I had seen the poster. I always thought it was like a science fiction movie because the poster looks all nuts.
The Russians tend to
Yeah, it
do
looks
that.
like Stalker or something.
Yes.
Yeah, it looks CGI. Or I don't know what's going on in that poster.
The Russians tend to do that.
It's very misleading.
Yeah.
I don't know. But yeah, zero science fiction in this. It's pretty grounded.
Yeah, so
the real.
For sure. And this is the, kind of our World War II episode, although there's still plenty of movies left to be about that.
There's a ton.
Yeah, clearly. And unwatchable movies too, or very, harrowing, difficult ones. But the similarities between these two, at least superficially though, I think are pretty striking, since we do have a single male, child character who is going through the horrors of war alone. And I think Come and See is something that came up in a lot of discussions about The Painted Bird when that was first released in 2019. So I would like for us to start with Come and See, which came out in 1985. This is a Soviet film, and it was based on a book from 1978 called I Am from the Fiery Village, which is co-written by the co-screenwriter of the film. And it's not a novel. I didn't read it, but I read about it. It's basically a collection of interviews with survivors of the Nazi occupation of Belarus. And in particular, it discusses I'm not totally sure how to say it, Catin Massacre, which was something I read about in preparation for this and is something that we see pretty much happen in Come and See. It was an incident during the war in March 1943, where this basically Nazi appointed battalion, in retaliation for some German soldiers being killed almost an entire village of people in Belarusia, who I believe there was only 8 survivors in the entire village of 157 people. They were all driven into a shed and it was burned down with them inside. At least like 75 of them were children. And really in Belarus in general, it's not something that gets talked a lot about as far as, what they went through during the war, but they were one of the hardest hit countries. Well over 2 million people were killed there, which was almost a third of the entire pre-war population.
Oh, God.
So light stuff here.
Yeah, and the film is as light as that sounds, which is not at all. So, but that was kind of the idea behind this, I guess, is to give an idea of what this particular experience was like. And that is where this movie takes place. They speak Belarusian. And yeah, that was the goal of the director, Elim Klimov, who's a guy who grew up in Stalingrad. At the time, it was invaded by the Axis, what I believe is known as the deadliest battle in the entire war. So he was bringing some of his own perspective to that, but as a filmmaker, I was looking at his filmography and I didn't really know anything else from it. There were like comedies, family films. There's a biopic of Rasputin.
I don't believe I know anything from his filmography actually either. I didn't even think of checking that, but yeah.
Yeah, he's pretty much only known for this, and this turned out to be his last film, even though he lived for decades afterwards and just never made another film again after this.
Killer mic drop. Smashing the mic on the ground and setting it on fire. Boy.
Yeah. I could.
This is, I'll just cut to the chase. I think this movie's really something. It is really a beautiful movie. And horrible.
It's interesting that you use the word beautiful, though, because I think one of the objective, good things about Come and See is the imagery in the film, right? So, for me personally, I get lost in the moments where you have all of the napalm, right, coming down, raining on across the fields later in the film. The moment with the crane, where they come across the crane actually a few times, or if we can just call it the bird, but I'm pretty sure technically it's called the crane. And then there's also the moment where I believe after they have the militia party speech, the boy gets lost in the woods again and he steps on a nest of eggs, right? All of those small moments, they're small moments, but I think the way that Klimov captures all of those are beautiful, as Seth puts it.
yeah, there's the key word is moment. I think with this movie, it zeroes in like what you think is the beginning of just like a short little back and forth. The camera suddenly stops. Well, the editing stops cutting. We have so many long takes, and we are just submerged in the moment
Mhm.
in so many of these, where just all of a sudden we go from 0 to 10, and shit like bombs are dropping, and we are like it is so much more effective um, because of how it lingers on these moments and stays and like makes us see like the whole thing, the whole aspect. Which, yeah, that's yet another. There's. I'm glad we're doing both of these movies. I think they are like, in my opinion, this one is how you do this better. And the Painted Bird I found like frustrating in those aspects of moments. And I know we said we don't compare
Yeah.
them
Spoiler.
in early in the podcast. I'm comparing them already. I'm just gonna be comparing them a lot because I think that was what stuck out to me, like because I was like trying to characterize because I watched Painted Bird first, and I was trying to characterize like what it was that frustrated me so much about the Painted Bird, and I'll get to that more. But one of the big things that I appreciated about this movie was the moments and that it actually like spent time like really like there's a lot of like crazy shit that happens and horrible shit that happens in this movie, but there's really like one big climactic like horrible thing that we witness, which is the burning of that village at the end, where Painted Bird just goes one after the other. There's just like
It's relentless in that way.
it like numbs you to a certain point.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and if I can just be allowed to ramble a little more, it is what I really loved about this movie is again going back to the word beautiful. There is some beauty at the beginning. At least there's a moment, which we'll get there. There's some I don't know. I felt like this was at least made by people who do believe that at least some of the human race is worth saving in all of this. That there should be some mercy in the world. That maybe there is something to us that is worth preserving.
Well, I think that's interesting you bring that up because the heart of the film is that we're seeing it from the perspective of a boy, right? So
Mm-hmm.
perhaps we're seeing the beauty or the hints of beauty throughout all of this horrendous stuff because it's coming from the perspective of a boy who doesn't know any better, who hasn't seen very much in his short life, right? Um, and then all of a sudden, wham, he's put into the thick of it.
Yeah,
Really is.
and just in case anybody is listening who hasn't seen the film, just very broadly, this follows a boy who is in Belarus and joining the partisans to fight against the Nazi occupation. So at the beginning of the film, he leaves home in his little village, leaves his mother and little sisters, joins this group of partisans out in the woods. And that's really all that you need to know. They eventually get attacked. He eventually goes through kind of a journey and ends up at the village where we see this massacre happen. So that's just the broad overview of it. But I love that you guys are starting with this because it is very much about the perspective of this one character, and we see a big change in him from the beginning to the end, which is very visceral as far as his performance goes.
Well, that's perfect.
But just to
sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was just gonna say that's a perfect segue there because seeing it from his perspective, you know what? I lost my thought. Sorry.
That's all right.
It's fine. It happens to me all the time.
Yeah.
But yeah,
when I lost it.
That's all right. It'll come back.
Yeah.
Because this, and I do want to talk about the star of this movie in particular. But even before that, I do want to jump off of what you guys were saying about the style of it. And I think that is definitely what distinguishes this movie, because I tend to have a lot of trouble with movies that are very single-minded about just piling on the suffering, the brutality, as if there's going to be something profound that we get out of it just through the sheer relentlessness. And I think we've talked about movies like that. We'll talk about one a little bit later, to just jump onto Seth's spoilers. And this movie, I think, it is a tough sit. It is very intense, that it kind of sustains that intensity for most of the whole movie on some level or another.
Mm-hmm.
But it kind of on one hand gives us these surreal, almost dreamlike interludes and
Oh my
imagery
god.
throughout, that at the same time they counterbalance with this kind of hyper realism, and that tension actually reminded me kind of Werner Herzog films, which tend to be
Totally.
very, very ground level documentary like almost.
Mm-hmm.
And then this way with suddenly this absurd tableau or things that happen. And there's so many examples of this movie. One of the earlier ones is when the little boy joins the partisans in the forest, and they're all posing for a picture, and it's this extended tableau of them all like posing for this picture, and it's very drawn out, and there's this kind of almost whimsical edge to it, but at the same time it's very ominous. And that stuff goes a long way for me for modulating the tone of this movie and getting something more out of it than just, gee, isn't war so horrible?
Yeah, and you know what? I just remembered what I was going to say. So before, it ties into what you just said about the tone,
Mm-hmm.
but the boy, in the beginning, it should be said too that his mentality of war is either non-existent or he's all rah rah, let's go, hey, I want to get a gun, sign me up, let's do this thing. Like, he was very ambitious, he's eager, he wants to do these things, and he looks up to the other men of his village, or the ones that he's seen go off to war. And then all of a sudden that changes as we see in the film, and he progresses through all of these horrors one after the other. And obviously, once someone has seen all those things, your mind's going to be changed, right?
Yes.
Sure, yeah, and
And
there's
there
lulls in between.
Yes.
He
there
meets a
are.
girl. He has these little experiences. There's lots of wandering through eerie, fog-drenched fields,
Mm-hmm.
and again, this is still not a pleasant film, but the more that it really goes for those expressionistic touches, and even when it kind of just resembles like a horror movie, I think it's very effective. It's not just wallowing in the despair, it's really going for something visceral.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I appreciate that it zeroes in on a very specific setting, not only just a specific character, but a specific general area of a global conflict, right? Which I feel like we're so used to that in World War II movies or World War One movies. We are getting this like bird's eye view, like ensemble, like where you just get kind of lost in the just the sheer like overwhelming nature of it, where it is amazing to actually zero in on one event. This reminded me of like Slaughterhouse-5, how like that is specifically like zeroing in on the bombing of Dresden and all that, that we don't often get just like very specific like moments in a war conflict. It becomes so much more about the historical sweeping narrative of it, where this is like pretty much takes place in a lot of it has to do with the boy's village. He leaves the village for a time, he returns to the village, and they are refugees. And uh, really it's often it's like the setting doesn't change. It's a lot of this like natural beauty of the woods. That was like one of my favorite parts of this movie, because I were just like, I really love the woods, I'm really passionate about the woods, and this just has a beautiful like natural beauty that's on display here, which contrasts with the unnatural grotesqueries that are being brought on by the human characters that are just constantly destroying everything around it. Um, yeah, and it only helps it.
Yeah, I think you're right.
Yeah, this is not educational, or you're not going to really learn specific things, about the conflict in this. It's experiential. It's about, or experiential. It's about taking this journey. And I think that it does work as a film that is, I don't know if I wouldn't go as far as to call it surrealism, but there's definitely vibes throughout that verge on that's ethereal and a little absurd feeling in points. Which I'm sure it would feel that way.
Which I
Um,
think we're like yeah, you're like talking around my favorite part of the movie, I think, which is like when he meets the girl in the camp with the soldiers. There's this girl who's a nurse, but it also seems like maybe she's there for other reasons, like maybe some of the soldiers are like flirting with her, trying to get with her, maybe they are getting with her. I don't know, it's unclear, maybe.
Yeah, I wasn't
But
sure
once
exactly.
their regiment is attacked and everything, uh, it is pretty much just the boy and the girl together alone in the woods for a long stretch of the movie.
It's a good
And
middle.
that's really,
Yeah, the good
yeah,
middle
that's really
portion.
where there is like such a wonderful, surreal, like
That's it.
there's something lost there eventually that's super tragic, that it feels like you get a glimpse into the boy and how he could be happy, and a glimpse into the girl how like they're having like, despite being like lost in the woods and having like a terrifying time, they are like kind of there's like levity, there's dancing, they dance together to pass the time and all of this kind of stuff, they snuggle under the tree branches and
I
things
mean,
like
they're
that.
acting like preteen or teenagers, right? I mean, that's what they're
Mm-hmm.
supposed to be doing, right? If they weren't just thrown into the
Mm-hmm.
throes of war, right? But that's exactly what I was saying before
Mm-hmm.
with the crane. Like the moment that you're talking about when they're in the woods, um, man,
Oh, the
man,
crane.
I
Oh
love the
yeah.
moment with the crane. Like I had to read into it a little bit. I had to look up some symbolism stuff, but in Eastern Europe, some Eastern European nations, the crane is seen as an omen of not good things to come. So
Oh
yeah,
God.
so you have these beautiful moments with the crane and the boy. You know, he just gets the earth from underneath him ravaged. Trees get taken down. Bombs were coming all over the place, and then all of a sudden it goes quiet. He's got the ringing in his ears, and he sees the crane pop out. I think that's for me. It's got to be a highlight of the whole movie. But I'm just going off of what
Yes.
Seth was saying. I think that's definitely definitely one of the better parts of the movie, and it captures the imagery really well.
And that's what's stolen from us, like in the latter half of the movie.
Yeah.
Once the bombs drop and their little like borderline Eden sort of fantasy in the woods is destroyed by these bombs being dropped on them, the rest of the movie goes to hell basically.
Mm-hmm.
And we are like, it's disintegrating, and they're like further, you just feel it further and further getting away from like this beautiful moment where just like, why can't they just have a regular life together, and like it can't happen anymore because of what happened. And that is such an insane scene when the bombs drop, and it really expresses like something that I think, especially after watching zillions of action movies and Star Wars and shit like that, where like you drop a bomb in front of someone and they just like turn around and make a joke or something.
Right.
But this is like literally like bombs are dropped in front of you. You're like, you might not be the same ever
You're
again. Like
disoriented. You're traumatized. You know, God knows what's going
you're
through your
deaf.
head. You're deaf. Right. Like your senses are numbed for a short period of time. You're trying to regain your footing. Um, yeah. I mean, it's a laundry list of items.
And I think it's worth saying that it's not like this is a love story between these two characters or even a romance or anything.
Mm-hmm.
They really just seem like kids who are kind of stuck, and they have some kind of weird interactions. Like when they first meet, she's sobbing for some reason,
Mm-hmm.
and then he comes up sobbing almost in like a way that's making fun of her and starts laughing, and she starts laughing, and they're just laughing and laughing at
Oh,
each other. And
so
it has this
cute.
weird like, yeah, it kind of goes along with that uncanny image of her dancing, you know, in the forest in the rain. And there's this like ghostly old time music playing in the background with this kind of rumbling going on underneath. It's uh, moments like that are almost Lynchian to me as far as the like kind of uncanniness of it, where you can't quite put your finger exactly on what is so
Yeah.
strange about it.
Yeah.
And and but yeah, once those bombs fall, which is a great sequence again with the way the sound drops out, and this is where we really start to see a change in the boy. um and that's when they go back to the village that he left from, and that's another really effective sequence, I think, and maybe start another like kind of plunge into what the rest of the movie is going to be like. I really loved how they handled, you know, first he goes into his house and you just hear these buzzing of flies, but you don't like really see what they're on. You see there's children's toys laid out on the floor,
Mm-hmm.
but everyone's gone. And the intensity starts to kind of ratchet up, and him and the girl start walking like further and further away from the house, and she just like glances behind her to reveal this pile of bodies behind the house, and the kind of offhand way that they see that just as they're like leaving the house, and he is still holding out hope that he can take her somewhere where they're going to find his family and that they're not in the pile of dead bodies.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's in this like crazy shell shock denial kind of thing.
Totally shell shocked.
He's just like, and yeah, they like jump into a swamp, and he's like swimming in this horrible swamp. There's like it's like a full like, I don't know. They go with them into this muck, like up to their neck.
Obvious
It's
metaphor.
like real
just
mud
watching
too.
them swim the entire way to this island that he's like, they're on the island. They're not dead.
Yeah.
They're on the island, and like they're just like horribly like just in the muck. It's so crazy.
It's an obvious metaphor. It's some more symbolism, right? I mean, he just kept throwing the symbolism in there. Klimov, or whoever wrote the book,
Swimming through the
I should say.
Right. Well, yeah, or whoever came up with that. But yeah, I did find that to be like hypnotic because it goes on so long, and there's these strings and this ominous hum going on under the soundtrack. It can almost get like maddening that it's really putting you there with you feel like you're wanting things to go forward, the movie to proceed, and you're just trudging like through the mud.
It's interesting
with him.
It's interesting because it's like Klimov is focusing on how the boy and the girl are reacting to everything, right? So it's not so much the bombs are going off. It's not so much that, they're seeing all these different things. I think the parts where we're muddling around, we're seeing how these two are handling themselves amid all that's going on, right?
And there's so much with eyes, both their eyes.
Lots of close-ups with the camera, right? It's right in their face. Especially the moment with the girl.
An emphasis on these blue, like crazy eyes that they have that become more and more emphasized as the more shit that they see, that they come and see, flows into their eyeballs. It seems to just like infect them, like bodily.
Yeah.
One device that's used very heavily throughout this whole movie that's very striking, we haven't even mentioned yet, is how the characters will look directly into the camera constantly. And not, a lot of films tend to like end with a character looking into the camera, or it'll be something that happens once or twice. And this happens all throughout the movie, from the opening scene where the boy and another little boy are running around in the like trying to dig up left behind weapons on a beach. And right away we have them staring like directly into the camera. The one kid's pretending to like be a German, and it's all very eerie, and that happens throughout the whole film. And I'm not sure I've seen another movie where there's people looking right into the camera that often, which gives this really...
The proper term is gritty ozu, actually.
Oh, okay.
What is gritty ozu?
I just made it up. It reminds me of Ozu movies.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, like Tokyo Story and stuff.
What do they call that? The matte shot or something?
I didn't know
there's an iconic name for what Ozu came up with, where it's the camera at eye level with the actor or the character that's in focus. I can't think of the name.
Yeah, and it has this weird effect of being, it establishes a kind of intimacy, but it's also uncomfortable because
it's very
it's like they're looking at you.
Yes.
And the way that it's not limited to one character, it just keeps happening, is just another thing that I think distinguishes this movie.
For sure.
Yeah.
And I think we've been kind of loosely talking about different influences sort of on this movie. And I think it's hard not to say that Klimov would have been inspired by Tarkovsky in some ways, especially since we keep going back to the imagery, right? So like Tarkovsky,
for sure.
I mean, Tarkovsky is a totally different level. I mean, Klimov does a good job here, and there's still credit due to him. But Tarkovsky influenced so many people with how he could capture nature in particular, and I think Klimov tries to channel into that a little bit for sure.
Yeah, I mean, this is a guy really, he's reaching somewhere real lofty where like I can only really compare him to like, sort of this like gritty bombast of like a Herzog, but with like a
with
visual
Tarkovsky.
vocabulary.
I mean, even when we were talking about
Kubrick.
Kubrick, yeah. I mean, when we were mentioning the poster before, very sci-fi. I mean, it even looks a little Eastern European. I mean, I'm not gonna lie. It has that aesthetic to it. So, agreed.
Now, I definitely want to talk about the star of this movie who plays this little boy. He has a name, Fliora, I believe. It's easier to just say the boy.
Floor. I don't know. It was like a weird name that began with the F.
Yeah. And his name, the actor's name is Alexei Kravchenko, and he was a non-professional actor that the director wanted to intentionally choose. And he was, I think, like between 14 and 16 while they were making this. I think he might have changed ages throughout it, and he did never act before. And after this
Low-key
movie,
child abuse. Okay.
yeah, right. And he did, after this movie, he wasn't in a single other thing for like 15 years, and then in 2000
I believe
he
it.
started being in films again. And I think that just whether you want to consider it a great performance or not, because it just seems so real, is his face, I think, is iconic in this. It's on, it's on the poster. And yeah, he starts out, of course, with this just, boyish enthusiasm about everything, and he's goofy, and the transformation is to the point where he literally looks like an old man who is totally shell-shocked. And it reminded me of Renee Falconetti in The Passion of Joan of Arc, if anybody has seen that, which is one of the most affecting like just visual performances in terms of facial expressions in the history of cinema, as far as I'm concerned. And especially when they like cut his hair, he resembles her so much that just
the shaved
looks on his face is,
the shaved head is a good effect for sure.
Yeah. And we just recorded an episode where we were talking about the horror movie Martyrs. And there's a part where this lady is tortured for like the whole last half hour of the movie. And one of the people from this cult runs in and says, the expression on her face, it's like she's transcended. You will never believe this look on her face. And, then we see it and it's just someone going, like, but if they had this kid's face, that would totally work.
Yeah. So I just want to say something about that, because that's where I do agree with you in certain extents there, for sure. I mean, he's iconic. He's got hell of a facial expression, right? So in my second watch, I think that's where my largest critique comes from, only because in between all the imagery and all the beauty that we're seeing, all the horrific imagery, I kind of found the acting from him to be more cartoonish in certain ways. I don't know if that really makes sense, but that's kind of the vibe I got when I was watching it for the second time through.
Do you think that because one could argue maybe that the way that the movie is shot and kind of pushes things into almost an exaggerated territory? Did you think that would have still worked better for you if the performance wasn't reflecting that?
It's interesting, because I don't think you're wrong to say that there's elements of hyper-realism in here, because I do believe that people sort of look, I'll say the word I used before, cartoonish, maybe when they're in their worst moments, right? So like maybe someone's sobbing, or if they go through a breakup, they don't look pretty, they look pretty ugly, or they're going through something, right? So that's probably accurate, but it's just something that caught me off guard this time around, where I knew what to expect, but it didn't necessarily fit the tone of what I was watching the full 90 minutes or 2 hours, or however long the movie is. It was just a note I had. One of my takeaways for how the lead actor, I mean, Klimov could have told him to act the way that he did, right? I mean, I'm sure he did. And it's also just interesting too, because when you think about it, it's probably really, really, really hard to act as like a 14-year-old boy especially if you've never been an actor before, and also how do you act if you've never actually known what war is like either, right? I mean, it's right.
He's also clearly having a very particular. The character is clearly having a very particular reaction. Like he is borderline. Like it feels like he's lost his mind or something.
That's a good point too. Like, I mean, if you
there's like 3 words at a time that can escape that boy's mouth. Like his like mouth is like crusted over. It's almost like it's being like sewn shut or something. It feels like, and he doesn't move his mouth anymore after a certain point. There's just certain times where he like says like a few things and that's it. We barely get any verbiage from him like the last like hour like plus of the movie.
That could speak to how we're supposed to see a severe difference in how he was so ambitious in the beginning to how he became such a shell of himself by the end. Mm-hmm. Right.
And I do love that about his arc. I think that is kind of a cliche in these like war movies about like, oh, they were so naive back then. They wanted to like go out and be heroes. And then they found out that it was, you know, oh, it's a very serious business war. But like this accentuates something maybe a little deeper at the beginning, which he's not specifically like looking for like, I want to be a war hero, this is going to be cool. That's in there. But at the same time, he has the same kind of problem that I think like, I don't know, like young kids, maybe specifically young men, like at an early age have, where they are like despondent, like don't really care, or like emotionally vacant because he's like ready to leave his mom, and his mom is like telling him like, if you leave, like your sisters are going to be in a really tight spot. We might die. You might as well. She hands him an axe at a certain point and tells him to kill his sisters.
Yeah.
Because you're killing them by leaving, and he's just like, he doesn't care. Like,
or he doesn't get how that, or how that's like how his sisters are going to die because he leaves. Like he doesn't get it, right? So
he doesn't get responsibility, and that's like one of the big arcs of this that I think he'd like, in a really like harsh, horrible way, he like finds out very quickly that he does really care about human life, and it is affecting. It is effective, and you like it is a horrible thing to see a life lost or be responsible for something. Because yeah, at a certain point, he also, I mean, whether it's true or not, he believes that a lot of this is his fault because he found the gun at the beginning, and which is so like the old man at the beginning who sees them like trying to look for guns so they can join the army. He tells them, don't do that. The Germans will see you and they'll think that you're like trying to pick a fight with the Germans, and the Germans will come down on us. Basically.
And they do see him through a plane, and
that is sort of
later on they find that same old man, and his whole body is charred from the like, you know, yeah, and which is kind of, you know, a pretty gross scene, and he comes out and says that this is because of you guys, which, you know, may or may not be true, but
it's interesting actually too, because he specifically says when he's burned on the ground, doesn't he say something like you shouldn't have found the gun or something? I tried to write a note on this and I can't remember. Let me see if I have.
Yeah, he basically blames him for it, that I think for the village being attacked.
He sort of blames him, but he doesn't really. Hold on. I think I got it here. He says you shouldn't be glad that you found the weapon. Yet finding the weapon is what changed the circumstances for Floor to actually get away from the village before everybody got killed. So there's a little bit of an irony there. Like he's going on like saying, oh, like you shouldn't have found the weapon, but the weapon actually sort of saved his life because he ended up leaving the village before it got totally razed to the ground.
Basically survivor's guilt with a mouth, though.
Yeah.
In this sort of like, cool, you survived, buddy, but no one else did.
Yeah, like that could be the point.
And it's so rough.
Yeah. Totally could be the point.
Yeah.
There.
Yeah, that all makes sense. And Seth, I'm really glad you brought up that scene with his mom and sisters, because I forgot to point that out, because that's one of the few moments of like real levity here, I love the moment where his mom shoves this hatchet in his hand, says, just go ahead.
You-
And she pulls the girls out of bed, and she's like, go ahead, just kill him now. And he kind of like winks at the girls and makes a little gesture
Yes.
like he's going to do it.
He does.
And they're giggling. And that's just so humanizing and like it's charming at that point.
It's charming, but it's also like the mom means it. And that's what's so harsh.
Well, yeah, the mom's freaking out, but the way the kids are all giggling about it, I think.
Charming and
it's
morbid
cute.
all at once.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And especially, I mean, you really want to grasp onto a moment like that when everything else is so grim here.
So terribly grim.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So let's talk then about, I guess, what's the big, centerpiece of the film, which is when he does end up in this village, that as the battalion is arriving and rounding everybody up. And this is I think our closest encounter with, the enemy, with the Germans, where they show up and they're in total control and everybody is helpless. They're carting this body around that's like holding a sign that says, I insulted a German soldier this morning. And you get the full, scope of how this is working. And they do exactly what happened in real life. It's a long sequence. They round up everybody and put them into this shed. And I definitely want to get everybody's impressions just about this sequence and how it works, in the context of the movie as kind of the climax. It's definitely tough to watch. And I will point out one particularly disturbing detail when they do have this shed jammed full with over 100 people. And one of the soldiers leans in and says, you leave the kids behind and you're free to go. So if you leave your kids in there, we'll let you come out, which is just a particularly sadistic and apparently real life detail.
Well, it is. And obviously he doesn't, they're not, it's like a false sense of security also, because they're not actually going to let them go, which we do find out, right? Because they let them leave. Anybody that does leave just gets mowed down afterward. And then they end up just killing everybody inside anyway. So it's kind of like you said, it's sadistic. But it's a real life, like it's something that actually happened when they forced these people into these buildings or chambers, whatever you wanted to call
it. Really, just the fact that our protagonist ends up in the building and then getting out and surviving is maybe the most implausible,
That's a good point.
Development in the movie.
Very dreamlike. He just wanders out, whereas there's a few others that try and wander out and they get shot.
Yeah,
but he just wanders out and they just let him go.
He like wanders out, or does he pops out the window or something?
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
But somehow he sticks around, and there's a disturbing thing later where these soldiers grab him and like pose for a camera holding a gun to his head. And after they take the picture, they just walk away and leave him.
Yeah. Which that is what's really on display here. Just not just the like, oh, this is war and we need to like destroy the other, and all that. And it's very serious. Like, it's just like the drunken party nature of the whole thing is really like expressed here, that this is a party for the Germans. They are all getting drunk and they are just gathered around and throwing things at this burning barn full of human beings. But because they have this mindset that these are not the proper human beings to walk this earth, therefore we can just kill them and it doesn't matter. Or I don't know. It's hard to. People will be trying to characterize, the German Nazi mindset till we all perish. We will never get to the full bottom of it, but it's really is on display here, that like horrible, implausible yet very plausible lengths that people can get to when it comes to cruelty. And enjoying cruelty.
That's kind of the sick part of it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And have either of you guys seen Shoah? Have you heard of Shoah?
It's on the list.
Yeah, it's actually something I haven't seen it, but it is something that we might possibly even watch for this podcast because of the length and just imagining how grueling it would be to hear these stories so thoroughly.
So I'm just gonna make a quick comparison because it's the biggest thing that sort of struck me, and I had seen Shoah for the first time last fall. and it's a good point to what Seth said in the beginning of this podcast, where he mentions, I think it was Seth anyway, where he was going on about how Come and See is a sequence of events and how it's relentless, right? So like it's kind of, I mean, you get a few lulls in there with the imagery, but the point is to be horrified by atrocity after atrocity after atrocity, which we will also see and make comparisons to with the Painted Bird. The interesting thing, though, is after seeing Showa, it is the complete opposite happening, where Showa does not show a single dead body. It does not show a single photograph of a dead body. It doesn't show a single gun getting fired. Yet it is so emotionally heavy that it could very well match or surpass your experience with Come and See or any other World War II film. For me personally, it's unmatchable because of how Claude Lanzmann handles that material, and he wanders through like the village, Belarusian village, right? That's where this one takes place. Claude Lanzmann takes his camera and he wanders around all of these sacred, they call it sacred grounds now, to where all of these people have perished, and it's you're basically watching all these areas where ghosts exist, or you know, I'm saying ghosts, but you know what I mean, right? And it's the emotional toll on that, having that in between all of these interviews. It's quite something. And I thought about Showa when I was watching this because it has the same effect, but with a complete opposite strategy, where it doesn't show the atrocities per se. Does that make sense?
Well, yeah, it makes it live in your head, just like, you know, if you're reading the way it is kind of with reading.
That's a perfect way to put it. Perfect way to put it. And it's highly recommended. Obviously, don't watch it if you don't want to be in a bad, terrible, sad mood, because it's super emotional, and I'm sure you've heard that before. It's also 9 hours long, so you got to make sure that you put the time in for it. But it is absolutely essential cinema, and it's something that I thought of when I was watching Come and See. A very relevant comparison. So, like, when you eventually get to it, you could probably make the same comparison.
Yeah, this film and The Painted Bird, if nothing else, that leave nothing to the imagination. You're getting everything there in front of you. And I do want to, ask maybe about what, is there a value really in doing these kind of recreations, like meticulous recreations of something horrible like this? And you could apply that to a lot of different things, to movies that are about, massacres or shootings or movies about 9/11 that really go a long way towards chiefly recreating something. And I know that a lot of Come and See has a lot of expressionistic imagery and things that get under your skin. But this particular sequence, a lot of it seems to be like, we want you to witness every detail of something that actually happened. And, there's kind of two ways to look at that, as far as whether that's not necessarily exploitative, although you could argue that, but also just that it's, just putting you through something and recreating it isn't necessarily illuminating it, or, there is an element almost of disrespect. There's not, movies generally don't show you like the inside of a gas chamber or something in the Holocaust, or the way that I was thankful we never return inside the shed once the fire starts. So we don't see, the smoking bodies and things. But yeah, where do you guys land with stuff like that, and this in particular?
Well, this in particular, I feel like I do think that it earns itself at the end, because it zeroes in, because it is very humanizing. It's very interested in the human aspect, and it's, I don't know, there's some real belief that humanity is worth saving, that there is some good in this kid, there's some good in humanity here, and that's what the purpose of bringing the dark stuff in, to contrast it, to remind us like what we should value and what we should fucking like eradicate and like extricate from, like, at all costs, as far as like evil human nature is concerned, like for the sake of innocence and this for the sake of goodness. So I think this one does earn its big moment with the village. I do think I don't know how I can really like critique the village sequence necessarily. I think I could say that it goes on too long. I could say that it's too gratuitous and it is like it's like just too much. Um at the same time, I don't know like what I would really take away because it does need to be just like I don't know. Then again, there is like with this and the paint, like less so with this, but with a lot of like this kind of stuff, like especially with the painted bird, there becomes like rumination on suffering. Like once it actually feels like it's inflicting suffering on the viewer, I kind of wonder what the real purpose is. Like it becomes less about education and more about like this thing that is impossible, which is like getting someone to like these human beings had to endure this, so you're going to feel some pain too, which is like the pain that I feel from this movie is painful, but I know it's nothing, and it's not an actual window into like what this real pain is. So sometimes I wonder about like, yeah, like same has been said for like sometimes like schools like just hammering the Holocaust like so hard into like kids at an early age, and just like sometimes like these I don't know yeah, it can be a lot, and it can be like I don't know, I do question sometimes just how what the real like what we really get out of that, yeah, just like the exposure
Y-
to harshness.
Yes, so I think, especially in regards to World War II, I think a lot of that is, because Klimov lived through it, right? Um, I
Mm-hmm.
think a lot of that is because those people don't want people in the future to forget what had happened. And I think that's a lot of the big takeaways with World War II, especially with the Holocaust. Um, and I think
Of
that. I
course.
mean, going back to Shoah, I think that's the reason why Landsman made that film too. I mean, he wanted to capture these real people in these interviews, saying like, "This really happened. This is legit. Like not that anyone's making conspiracy theories, but as humans, we forget things, and I think forgetting is a dangerous thing, but it's also something that we don't do on purpose, you know.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that goes to what you're saying, like seeing all this intense stuff. It That's really the only reason I can think of, right? It's so people don't forget,
Yes.
right? That's about the only good thing I can think of as far as defending it. Um, Personally,
Mm-hmm.
I like Come and See. I like the film. I don't rate it as highly as I used to anymore, only because I found some issues with the leading actor, and I think the tone is a little shifty in spots. But on the contrary, beautiful imagery, some beautiful sequences, for lack of a better word. Um, and I think it matters what you might be comparing it to as far as other World War II films, if that's something that's going on in your head, right? So I think that could be different for everybody.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm also
I mean, oh, well, yeah, just to finish
yeah, go ahead.
a little thread, which yeah, that is like I guess what I'm saying as far as all that's concerned is like I definitely agree that that is like essential
Mm-hmm.
for World War II and just uh war material in general in art. It is to make us remember and never forget, and like yes, like experience a little bit of this. There is just like a line sometimes where I do feel like I don't know how useful a certain amount of suffering.
I don't
Yeah,
think you're
like
wrong.
just it's just like difficult to find the line. I just think it's interesting to like find that line
Yeah,
and realize like I've been thrown beyond,
yeah.
and I'm like yeah, it is just more like I guess it is just like
I don't
yeah,
think.
this is no longer here to like yeah, we're not here to entertain, and it is like always going to be the sort of thing that just like the snake eats its tail with this stuff where it's like we're making a movie out of things that we should be seeing and we need to remember, but also it can't really be explained and it can't be understood and it can't really be like experienced through this medium, but we must try. So it is this really difficult thing. It's hard to even talk
Yeah,
about.
I don't think you're wrong. And you know, the other thing is too, there's a different line. That line you're talking about, I think, is different for everybody, right? So maybe
Sure.
majority of people, it's in the same vicinity, but yeah, right.
Yeah, and in general for this movie, if there is anything to temper my enthusiasm, it is that it's not. I don't feel like it's totally free of making me wonder about the value of it, and of kind of really hammering, one note of incredible horror,
Mm-hmm.
into the ground. And I, we've talked about the things that I think help um, modulate that throughout the film, and but especially, the second half is so just going through this torment that I still think maybe there is a little bit of a narrowness to it, where it can be easy to show you terrible things and get you to agree that they're terrible. And so there is a line about how much prodding you really need and how insightful something is being just by recreating it for you.
Mm-hmm.
And actually, my reservations continue into everything that happens after the village scene, which I want to talk about. Because there is kind of a stylistic like rupture that happens at the end of this movie that's kind of
Oh, it's nuts.
unexpected. Before we get to that, though, the partisans do arrive afterwards and round up kind of like a small group of Nazis who are left from this group. And we have a couple of them who are begging for their lives and saying, no, Hitler made us do this. The SS gave us the command. I'm an old man. I've never, and you can tell that they're being disingenuous about it and just trying to save their asses.
Right.
And yet there's another guy there who admits, like, yeah, I'm the one who told them that they can leave if they leave the
Yeah.
kids behind, and you guys don't deserve to live.
Right.
And it goes as far as one of them, who's begging for his life, that he's like, give me gas, and he starts dousing his comrades in gas like he's gonna light them on fire.
Yes.
And it ends with all of them just being shot anyways by the group.
That's a powerful scene. I am, yeah, that was a really effective scene, because I was getting to the point where I was like, okay, like,
Where's there to go from here?
Yeah.
I am like way too zoomed out and like just kind of numb at this point. But that was like, it was just like I don't know, it was a head trip that I hadn't really experienced necessarily like that. Yeah.
I liked that scene and moment more, or at least I thought it was more effective than the final moments where the boy has the gun and he shoots the portrait of Hitler, and then we get brought into all these fast edited sequence of everything, shots of the war, etc.
Yeah, real life footage.
Real life footage, yes. I actually
Yes.
thought what you guys were just talking about was more effective than that. Not that it was
I could
not that
agree.
it was bad, but I think it almost throws off the flow of what we had just seen previous. Not like it doesn't quite fit maybe to what we, all the muddling around in nature, seeing bombs go off, and then we're seeing all these people in the shed getting herded together and killed. Then we see these Germans get what's coming to them, and then all of a sudden we're in like documentary territory, for lack of a better word.
Yeah,
That
and
scene is difficult. I'm not totally sure how I feel about it, because yeah, it is. The boy finds a picture of Adolf Hitler in a puddle, and he starts just shooting at it. And we are seeing like basically in reverse, and the film is reversing a bunch of footage of Hitler and his rise to power. Like every shot is reversing Hitler
Again and again and
further
again.
and further away, and he's destroying Hitler like through time, all the way to the point where Hitler is a baby, and then he's unable to kill baby Hitler, basically. Which I said it wasn't science fiction, but it almost is for a second.
It does it there for a second. Yeah.
but it is I don't know. I'm not sure how I feel about it. Like part of me like really loves it because it does preserve the boy. It both my problem with it is this like contradiction that I'm trying to sort through, which is like that it both like loses the boy in the narrative and loses the narrative focus because it simplifies everything and boils it down to Hitler now, which my favorite part about this movie is that it's like it's so removed from the greater conflict and like all these like sweeping narratives that we know about in the history books, and it's more about the individual in a village, a specific village, like that is attacked, like your village would be attacked
Well,
during
that's
this
the
time.
interesting part, right? So philosophically, I think I like the idea of him shooting the Hitler portrait, right? Because it goes back to where Hitler's a baby, right? What what
Hmm.
is this 14-year-old boy? He's essentially a baby wandering around,
Yes.
right? So it's a really interesting comparison where he stops and doesn't shoot the baby Hitler, right? Or we
Hmm.
don't hear a gunshot anyway. So it's like, you know, this baby grows up to be this atrocity of a man, but you know, what exactly triggers that, what changes that, what actually turns him into the atrocity. um, because maybe the same thing could be said for the 14-year-old boy, not that he's Hitler, but that things change people for the better or for the worse, right? And I think
Hmm.
it's an interesting thought experiment that's going on there. What I was saying before is I just don't think the tone of all the editing necessarily fits as a final exclamation point to what we had been seeing before, or at least matching like the imagery and just all of these thoughtful moments that were going on prior.
It seems like a really strange place to end in a movie like this because everything up to this point is so much about the experience and, like Seth said, not about the greater historical context. And this seems to suddenly be bringing up these themes that haven't been
Mentioned.
addressed at all in the movie before,
Hmm.
that now all of a sudden this is about, morality or a vengeance, or about, specifically about the individual of Adolf Hitler,
Right.
where we're mainly getting a bunch of faceless, combatants, which is how, the war would have actually really been fought at this point. So it does seem out of place to me. I'm pretty ambivalent about that, even though it does seem like a very bold move to suddenly see all of this like backwards running footage
Mm-hmm.
of
Hmm.
things. But as it went on, and especially, ending on seeing Hitler's mother and baby Hitler and everything, it seems to be narrowing everything down to some kind of point that the movie isn't ready to really address. And it is kind of simplistic. Also, it's like you really think that if Hitler, had but died as a young person, that we wouldn't have somehow found our way to this nationalistic fervor that was taking over the country at the time, and
Mm-hmm.
all these atrocities that happened. It's not as easy as just killing Hitler.
Well,
Uh,
that's exact. I agree with you, and I think the key point is trying to make the comparison of our main character to what Hitler once was, right? Like he
sure,
was
his
once
innocence that was lost, just like his was.
exactly
Mm.
something along those lines. I think is the point, and
I
I think it's a very interesting point, at least to say the least.
Yeah, I mean, I think, and this is my flip side to how I feel about it. What does work for me, and maybe what's so jarring about it, is because we've lost our main character in so many of the sequences towards the end. Like he's barely there, like in more ways than one.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Like he's barely there.
It's like catatonic almost.
He's like catatonic and
Definitely a
he's
shell
like
of
not
himself.
participating, but it does, like we call it simplistic, a simplistic gesture to like, but it is, this movie is supposed to be from a boy's perspective, a young boy's
Mm-hmm.
perspective, which is simplistic and would be like, as a little kid, me thinking about World War II, I wouldn't have some sort of like now it's not just as simple as like one man caused everything, which is true. I know that now, but like from a little boy's perspective, he would just see it zeroed in on what he's been told, which is like Hitler.
Mm-hmm.
There is this one guy, and he caused all of this. And if only I could just stop him from ever existing, none of this would happen. So it is this grand, like, imaginary, like, gesture that only, like, probably a little kid could be naive enough to make.
Well, and it's,
which does work for me.
It's interesting too, because you had mentioned earlier also that in comparison to other World War II films, you usually have a macroscopic look of everything, right? It's broad events, broad everything that might hone into something universal. And this film is about a very specific village, very specific character, where all of a sudden in the end, we see the macroscopic events of the war tossed into just a few minutes, honing in on one particular point, right? So it goes along with what you were saying before, and I think it's again, I think it's very interesting.
I think we can agree on that.
Yeah.
It is interesting.
Yeah.
Oh yeah,
I don't know if it's I don't know if it's proper. I don't know if it's the right move, but I don't know.
Yeah.
He is a little kid. He's a little kid.
Yeah.
And I kind of felt in the like final shots after that at the end of the movie to be a little bit kind of like it was searching for the right ending without really having much of a place to go after, you know, everything's been accomplished. We've come and seen and gone witness what happens in this village. And, you know, there's just kind of this long shot following the partisans in the woods, and the boy kind of catches up with them. The camera loses them for a second in the woods and then finds them again. And there's like Mozart on the soundtrack. It kind of pans up the trees. I don't know, almost like it's trying to find some kind of a satisfying ending or something to leave us with, but nothing really came across very strongly for me with that. If it was trying to make a point or be uplifting, or, you know, is this movie about the futility of war, or is it supposed to be something about, there is kind of a pro-resistance feel to it, because we've seen the horrors that have happened. What are they supposed to do? Not resist it? And so he's going out and joining them again still, which doesn't seem to connect with his little thought experiment about Hitler that just happened. Yeah, I don't know. I almost feel a movie like this, when it hits those points so hard, it kind of paints itself into a corner. And that's why I found the stuff after the massacre to be kind of the weak points.
Yeah, I agree.
I thought the Steadicam shot was just really cool.
It was.
I have nothing to say about it. I just thought it was really cool.
Yeah.
So I can't really knock it.
Yeah, that's true too.
I guess I don't really care that it doesn't mean anything, I guess. Which I don't think it means anything.
Well, any final thoughts or any things we didn't talk about before we kind of wrap up with this film, and whether we would unwatch it or not? Or you can just go ahead and answer that question if you if no one else has anything to throw in there.
I don't think I have anything else on Come and See. I think we covered it all.
It certainly has a reputation, you know, for being a difficult to watch and harrowing film, and is considered a classic. Certainly one of the most significant Soviet films ever made. And so yeah, did you guys, you know, like, are we all on the I wouldn't unwatch this kind of side, or is there part of you that didn't think it was worth it?
Let me make sure I'm saying that right. I wouldn't unwatch it. Yeah, that's correct.
There you go.
Yeah. No, I would totally glad I watched it, especially for a second time. Even though I said my rating went down a little bit, but that's neither here or there. Definitely essential viewing.
I would agree, especially as far if you are interested in World War II and the study of it and study of human cruelty at all.
A very different perspective for sure for World War II, being focused on a Belarusian village, and from a 14-year-old boy's perspective.
Yeah, I agree too, and I think this is almost a good entryway for people who are interested in war films, and this one is you know, very much an art film, and it kind of splits that difference. This isn't really like, you know, your dad's World War II movie,
Platoon.
but
exactly drone music.
Exactly. Almost in the way that, you know, Apocalypse Now might be something that introduces people to a new kind of filmmaking and artistic expression in the context of being a movie about the war, about the Holocaust.
Yeah.
And then from, you know, the other vantage point, it's something that very much does count as a war film or a Holocaust film that, you know, for people who are into art house films primarily, can also find to be more interesting than a typical war film.
Yeah, agreed.
All right. And all of those things apply maybe to different degrees to our next film, which came out in 2019 and is very much maybe a spiritual descendant of Come and See. I think it invites comparisons in certain ways, but that we will talk about. So yeah, the Painted Bird is also based on a book, although this is a novel by the Polish author Jerzy Kosiński that was published in 1965, and which I did read in preparation for this out of curiosity, and I definitely have some thoughts about the book in addition to the film.
Good boy.
Kudos to you for reading that.
Yes.
What a fun page turner.
Riveting.
My God. But it is a controversial book for many reasons outside of the content. But Jerzy Kosiński is an interesting guy who also wrote the novel for Being There, the Hal Ashby, Peter Sellers film.
Yes.
So, I mean, that's, a pretty significant, at least in terms of his films go. The Painted Bird came out before that. And, he was a Polish guy who grew up during World War II. And the book, The Painted Bird, is essentially, it sounds like a lot of stories that he used to tell people as if they happened to him, like at dinner parties and things, these brutal anecdotes. And the book just stitches them all together from the first chapter to the last of this little boy. It's not expressly autobiographical. It reads like a novel. And I think he allowed people to think that it was autobiographical, but
I heard that he made claims. I heard that he made a lot of claims and stuck by a lot of his claims to his death.
Made claims, and there were, as Marc had mentioned, well, sort of vaguely, there was accusations of plagiarism also.
Yes, plagiarism, of him having ghostwriters, of him not even having been fluent in English at the time that he wrote it, and that it was translated from his Polish original text, and that throughout his career he had different assistants and editors who did a lot of the writing, either enhancing it for him or doing it outright. And he's a slippery character in real life. He eventually died by suicide, and you can never
That's
quite.
Not slippery. That's not knocking suicide.
Right. No. Well, I mean, I'm not promoting it. Whatever. Anyways, but the book is, it's just this nameless boy who starts out 6 years old and is wandering the countryside, separated from his parents because they tried to find someone to adopt him during the war to keep him safe. And he just goes from village to village to village. These are all very primitive villages full of huts, and he meets, dozens of characters, goes through many, many different villages, and down to a person, the villagers are cruel, sadistic, superstitious, sexually depraved,
primitive,
racist, stupid, hypocritical. They're monsters. Almost every single person that he meets, no matter how far out he goes. And
it doesn't matter if they're Russian, German, American, whatever.
Every single one.
Every single person
is trash.
And it's
evil things.
Every chapter it's very episodic. Every chapter is just trying to top the last one almost transparently. There's bestiality, incest, child rape, torture, genital mutilation, eyes scooped out, and endless animal cruelty of every animal is in a more creative way brutalized, much more than you see in the movie. And reading it really does seem unfilmable, and that only a serial killer would ever think that this should be something that should be made into a movie, because there's nothing else there besides these anecdotal atrocities, just one after the other. And it almost started to read comically to me as it goes on. And to think that anyone ever could think that all this stuff happened to one person is just seems preposterous to me.
Yeah,
it's hilarious in its own way. And I imagine from what you're saying, I mean, you're describing my movie experience basically. That's how this feels. This feels like very accurate to that this is just a endless gallery of horrors that are shown to me for no reason,
Yeah.
little to no reason. And they do feel so over the top and so exaggerated that, like, again, it couldn't be more different from Come and See in that way, that it is just like go on and like, oh, burning people in a shed, who cares? That's one of many things that, like, it does not give the human dignity to the moments. It feels like the
It's
moments are just hopped into and hopped out of, which does, yeah. And it does read very much like someone who is just trying to shock. And they are, I wonder, I wanted to know more about the filmmaker's perspective on this, if he was going more for that rather than trying to, like, looking at it not as its intended purpose, which I think was to, like, not only shock, but like he thought he was making some kind of, by shocking people, he was making some kind of grand
mhm.
gesture of like showing us the, basically doing a ham-fisted job of what Come and See does really well, which is showing you cruelty but with a purpose, right? Which this has no purpose, and it is just shock. And I feel like the filmmaker is also just sort of doing that. It's just showing me things that are awful that someone felt the need to write down one time.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, to use a maybe not so good to anecdote, it's kind of like if you ever know someone who's a salesman in real life, and they always try to one up everything that maybe you've experienced in your life. So like when you say that,
Mm.
oh hey, I went swimming in this lake, they say, oh hey, I went swimming in this lake and it was way bigger than that lake. It's kind of like that's just what it feels like, right?
Yeah,
But
we're just
Oh
trying to
yeah.
upsell you to the next like product after you. Okay, I'll buy this. Oh yeah, well, would you buy this now?
exactly, where it's like, oh, I have a ham sandwich for lunch. Oh, well, that's nothing. I got a 6 foot whatever sandwich, and they just
Yeah,
keep
I
going
had
on.
I had sex with the pig
Exactly.
and then butchered it.
Yeah, yeah. So that's kind of what it feels like for sure. Um, yeah, and
Yeah.
I was just gonna say
Mm.
I had the comparison in my head to a non-World War II film. I have you guys seen Satan Tango by
That's
Yes.
another
Bellatar?
one that's on our list.
Okay, so another. It's funny. I'm throwing these comparisons out there, and these are like 10,
Yeah,
10 hour long movies.
right.
But Satan Tango was what came through my head when I watched The Painted Bird, and The Painted Bird is nowhere near as long as Satan Tango is, but it sure felt that way. Um,
It felt longer than the book, frankly.
yeah, but
Can I
uh,
Yeah, I skimmed a lot. I skimmed a lot on this movie. I'll admit that. I did not skim on Satan Tango, which is 7 hours
so
long.
yeah, and
That's, if that gives you any indication about how this movie feels.
I bring it up in particular though because I think the slow cinema, or what they call slow cinema, like Bellatar, his niche, right? Um, I feel like that's appropriate comparison here because I think who's the director of The Painted Bird? I don't know if I can say his name.
Vaclav Marhal.
Yeah. Okay. So
He's a
Vaclav
Czech director.
Marhol. Okay, so I feel like he's grabbing inspiration from the slow cinema with this, or he's trying to, because the first chapter scene with Marta, I'm getting vibes of like the Turin Horse, another Bellatar movie, or like Satan
Love
Tango.
that movie.
Satan Tango is split up into chapters, right, from different perspectives of different characters, so it's almost an exact comparison there. And basically, those were the two things that were going through my head. Of course, Bellatar's movies are also black and white, crisp. The cinematography is probably the best part of The Painted Bird. Everything looks gorgeous. Everything looks great. It's just so much how the narrative is put together, and maybe the acting I have a little bit of an issue with too, because it's interesting how they chose to have A-list actors in some of these roles where you feel like nobody, like people who are nobodies, should be playing these characters. Don't know how you guys felt about that.
Yeah, they're hella distracting. Udo Kier coming out of nowhere. It, like,
Harvey Keitel
to
out of nowhere.
be in like really intense
Mhm.
scenes that I'm supposed to not be distracted from. There's not supposed to be like, haha, it's Udo Kier, like beating his wife to a bloody pulp
Yeah.
and pulling out his brother's eyeballs. But
Or like Barry
I don't
Peppers
know.
reprising his role as a sniper in a war movie.
Yeah, dumb.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, it really reads to me like there's so little going on here, and none of the actors really get much to do. So it's like, well, maybe Udo Kier can bring the gravitas of just his presence to this nothing role that
Yeah.
doesn't get to do anything. And I think you're totally right that the only good thing I can say about this is, it is handsomely shot. There's nice, stark black and white cinematography, though even that feels like the director really is just stealing every trick he can from slow cinema, from even Tarkovsky type moments, that there's a real like pretension to this, that he's going to somehow wring out the profundity by presenting it in this particular and familiar way to anybody who's into these kind of art films. And especially the way that it seems like every single scene we're going into these villages, and it's just everyone always are just sullen, and they stand around in morose silence doing nothing, like he's gonna somehow get this to be profound the more he prolongs the silences. And like the book has almost no dialogue, but it tells you what they're saying. It'll say, the narrator will be like, well, this person told me a story of this happening, and they explained to me this. So it's almost like, well, the director was adapting the book. He also wrote it, or wrote the screenplay, and there was not actual dialogue you can just pluck from the book. He would have to invent it
Interesting.
from what's described. And so he's like, that's a little too hard. Why don't I just have everyone be completely silent for the whole movie? And it'll seem more meaningful that way, even though it doesn't make sense. And it started to drive me crazy how everyone's just always standing around, like doing nothing and saying nothing. And I think that's also why you can have this multinational cast, because they never have to talk. So you can have Harvey Keitel there. You can have
Doesn't matter.
Barry Pepper and Stellan Skarsgård, because who doesn't matter what all they got to do is just show their face.
Well, and to go again on my comparison with Satan Tango, it's actually another personal issue I have with Satan Tango is I think Bellatar has a really weird way of capturing characters. Like the people interact really weird, and it's sort of like what you're saying, like people don't talk, or they don't react how you think they would react to certain scenarios. And for me personally, that's sort of a little bit of a turnoff, at least in the way that that's captured in that movie and in this movie. It sort of takes you out of the experience, because then you have this cinematography that's just gorgeous, and maybe some scenes might even pull you in, but then like the way that the characters interact just totally throws you right back out.
Yeah, I mean, I really love those sort of like non-realistic performances. Like, I'm a huge David Lynch fan.
I am too.
I love stuff like that is like a performance, just like people don't talk like that, people don't act like that, but they're doing it in this movie. And I that is true about Bellatar movies. I think, though, it's just a matter of doing it right and doing it wrong, kind of, and doing it in a boring way, as opposed to just like at least a creative, interesting way of like fucking with reality, where here it just more reads as like art house by numbers. Like, you put people, you make it, and you make them look sullen and serious, and you put it in black and white, and you get a really good cinematographer. And like, I don't know, oh my god, if you're gonna make a movie in black and white, like, you gotta really sell it to me and make it worth it. Like, make it like, I love black and white photography, but it's a gesture, it's a big move, and it just feels like so like low hanging fruit to make this sullen, evil, dark movie about World War II, like black and white and stuff.
Well, I think my critique about how like they don't act like real people is something that only makes sense because in Bellatar's movie or in this movie, they're trying to capture a realism or hyper realism to what's going on. And so in that way, it sort of feels counterintuitive to each other. Only because I agree with because I agree with you, because I like David Lynch movies, for example. Like I totally buy that, and I like the over the top that happens in those movies. I like how characters don't talk like the way that they are supposed to in real life. I agree with you on that.
And I think
I
that
guess
that
I would
hurts a
say that
movie like
both.
this because it wants you to be, it wants to make this point about the evil of humanity and all of us, yet everyone is this monstrous caricature. So what does that really tell
See,
us?
I'm split on this because I don't know necessarily, because I kind of feel like this isn't going for realism necessarily, because if it is, this guy is like super naive and just sucking this writer's dick and has not even read the wiki page, that this is all lies and shit and obvious lies, because for me it's at least interesting. This movie is at least interesting on paper, the idea of like exploring this guy's lies that are just like morbid visions that he came up with himself, that are just like constructed nightmares basically, that are fantasy sequences basically, that like, yeah, people don't act like this, people don't like, people are cruel to each other, people were cruel during World War II, but this is like some sort of weird like gross fan fiction version of
That's
like,
that feels
I don't
that
know,
feels valid.
I mean, it
which is
doesn't
interesting
go.
on paper, but like it's excruciating to watch and just,
It was
it's not fun to watch.
it's I think another part of it too is just the way that the chapters are almost, it's not smooth, it doesn't feel fluid, it's almost like they're pasted and Frankenstein together, if that makes sense.
That's true.
Right?
Some of the moments, like there's a moment where he goes into the, like very early on in the movie, like where he goes to the next village and he sees someone like looking at him, and then they immediately cut to him surrounded by a crowd of villagers being screamed at, and like they're
Yes.
threatening to throw him in the river and drown him or something.
Yes.
And like, it's, I thought that was kind of interesting, the sort of like hack job editing thing, but it doesn't really, not that much comes of it. And I think I agree, a lot of that does happen. Yeah.
Yeah, it's lots of short, choppy scenes that, um, just lots of, okay, here's a shot of him, cleaning shoes. Here's a shot of him laying in bed. Here's a shot of him the next day. Like just kind of giving us all the information that we need and getting to the next point. And the book really reads that way too. That there's no really sense of like a thread or a forward momentum as they go. Sometimes the narrator will have like a kind of revelation or of some kind, and it never carries over into the next chapter. Sometimes it doesn't even explain how he got to the next place. It's just like, now he's with the carpenter who scoops at the guy's eyes. Now he's with a blacksmith who traps birds and tortures animals. And now he's with this guy in another profession who forces his daughter to have sex with a goat. We'll talk about that scene, by the way.
Yeah.
And it really it feels like, and even on that level, so I don't know. One example, I want to talk about some of the little episodes here, because it is like a little title card will come up. It'll say Marta or Olga or Hans. And this is the little vignette that goes along with that part, just straight out of the book. But in every case, since it is an adaptation, it loses that interior monologue. Anything that is like, there's a part in this where there's a girl he meets who starts having sex with him, and I'll just go straight to this. We're going out of order.
I'm glad you're bringing it up, because it's the one scene for me that's sort of stuck out from the bunch.
Yeah, it's and it's even worse in the book, but so he has sex with this girl like off and on, and then at one point he like sees her having sex with a goat. I don't know if it's supposed to be. I read somewhere that it's almost like she's supposed to be like simulating it to mock him in the movie. I don't know. In the book, he just discovers her and her like father making her have intercourse with this goat. And in the book, he has this whole thing where he talks about like, oh, everything in life really is evil, and the only way to get by is to inflict as much harm as you can in equal proportion to the harm that gets inflicted on you. It doesn't work very well in the book, but it is something that's there at least. And all of those moments are gone from this. It's just like the bare action of, okay, now let's just show him see her fucking a goat, and then in the next scene he's stringing up the goat, and he beats an old man, and I guess he seems angry about it, and then we go on to the next scene. There's no sense of any kind of meaning or psychology or what's really going on underneath there, which is a problem with a lot of adaptations in general, but especially here, reducing everything just to the level of showing us all of this stuff ends up making it like
Just
as
adapting.
pointless as it is tedious.
Yeah.
Literally just adapting. There it is.
Yeah.
A picture of it.
Yeah.
There it is.
Yeah.
The scene with the girl or the woman that has sex with him is also caught me off guard because I was not expecting a rape scene to go that way. Woman to boy, which is something that I don't think is totally very common either. So, I mean, for that reason alone, it kind of stands out. But then it's also kind of crazy because then they bring the goat into the whole thing.
Yeah, and it just plays like shock value to me.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, exactly. It does play the shock value. At least, yeah. Any sort of real whatever genuineness it has sort of gets lost, I think, when they bring in the latter half of that, especially with the goat.
Well, because it just keeps on hammering home that there isn't a greater meaning here. That there, for me, like, this is a barren wasteland of a planet with these husks called humans that are meaningless.
Yeah.
And their existence is it like whether they do bad things to each other or not is like meaningless. It just all feels so nihilistic.
Yeah.
That I had an incredible like hard time watching this. We've watched some whoppers, but what really is the most punishing for me anymore is not necessarily content. It is the content not being rewarding in any sense, or not having any sort of real worth.
Yeah.
Which, yeah, I think again, Come and See is a great installment for this podcast as far as like what we are hoping to get out of movies that are controversial or difficult. There is something to be gained by seeing these things. It is good for us to experience and like experience things like the horrors of war, to see why humanity is worth like why humanity can go somewhere positive or not positive. Here it is just gratuitous and meaningless, and it's a meaningless exercise, so go fucking kill yourself or something, it feels like.
Yeah.
Yeah, it feels the fatalism just feels more like fashionable than anything really.
It's a trend.
Meaningful.
Oh, yeah.
It's a trend, or yeah, it's got like a trendiness to it.
And there's really nothing else to pull out of the novel, so it seems like he was just kind of, the filmmakers were just defaulting to that and trying to find some point to it. If anyone's listening to this who hasn't seen the movie, obviously it doesn't sound like we're recommending it, but I do want to give a sense of some of the little episodes that happen here. And the title, The Painted Bird, comes from the Lek and Ludmila section, where basically he stays with this guy who captures birds. And one of the things he does, like everything that everyone does in this movie, just for a cruel, sadistic thrill, will take a bird and paint it like bright colors. So when he releases it, it tries to join its flock again, and they don't recognize it as itself. And so they peck it to death, and, it falls from the sky. And I guess we're supposed to be taking some kind of metaphor, maybe that he, the kid becomes the painted bird or whatever.
Prejudice,
but this is
racism. It's just such a like easy, lame metaphor, I think. It's like we destroy the other.
It's like it's killing two birds with a stone or something.
Yeah,
oh,
nice.
Yeah,
maybe that's really what's going on.
Yeah, that makes more sense than anything else. And
one in the hand is worth two in the bush.
Yeah, exactly.
One painted bird in the hand. And there's also heavy. In this particular part, there's this woman. She's like this big, feral sex maniac who like lives in the fields. And the village boys have sex with her, named Ludmila, and she's in the book refers to her as Stupid Ludmila. is her like full name. And
Jesus, she was cool.
yeah, and it's just another atrocity that happens basically, where the bird painter enjoys having sex with her, although we don't get any sense about him having some kind of special relationship with her. Like, even we at least get that much in the book. But
I mean,
no,
having sex with each other in a field is a special relationship.
Sure, of course. Well, in that case, she has lots of special relationships, and
That's cool.
the village women.
I thought she was cool.
The village women gang up on her at some point and beat her to death. And just to give you an idea of the kind of things they do in this movie, they shove like a bottle up inside of her, and then someone kicks it so it shatters. Which is similar to the Udo Kier character, who's jealous of some guy looking at his wife, and so he literally scoops both his eyeballs out with a spoon. We get a shot of a cat like licking the eyes on the ground afterwards.
Yeah.
So dumb.
Yeah, I'm just trying to.
As we listed out, it really just starts to sound like a really bad black comedy, or
Yeah, I mean,
this had an ounce of humor in it.
Yeah.
An ounce. Oh my god.
Yeah.
It made it really jarring to watch Come and See afterwards, that there was like a couple scenes of levity and humor, and it was just like wild. I was like, whoa, there's jokes in this movie. That's wild. There's a joke in this movie.
Yeah, and at some points, what was in the book isn't even enough. So Harvey Keitel shows up as this priest who ends up taking in the kid and giving him to Julian Sands' character, who takes him home. And in the book, he's just this guy who doesn't want the kid and is bitter and sadistic and beats him mercilessly day in and day out constantly. And the movie decides, well, let's make him a rapist. And implies, thank God, all they do is imply that he's raping the boy, and that's why he's with him. And so it's interesting that with all the depraved material the book provides, that they're like, well, it'd be easier if we, he never gets raped by a man in the book, so
yeah, we wouldn't want this movie to be uncomfortable or anything.
Right. And at least he's one person who gets some kind of vengeance against him, which is something that also happens in the book, where the kid basically tricks him to take him to show him some valuables that he's found in the forest, and it's actually this pit of teeming with rats, and he manages to like pull the guy into it and then get devoured by the rats, which is one thing we don't get to see in the movie. We just hear his cries.
Man, they should have had a bigger budget and we could have seen that.
Exactly. It was interesting, the stuff they decided not to show, and then the stuff they decide to show in this.
Yeah. Rats eating a body, we can't do that.
Yeah, no. But we do get to see the kid buried up to his neck and crows attacking and pecking his head.
I kind of wish that was the whole movie, him like hanging out with that witch lady. I was just really hoping it would just be like him being an apprentice, like magician or something.
Now, I don't know.
Didn't happen.
Not to change the subject at all, but I don't know.
Sure.
I think I read somewhere that a lot of the A-listers, like Harvey Keitel, their lines were dubbed. I don't know if that's correct. Do you guys know anything about that?
I wondered that, because Harvey Keitel's lines really do look like they're dubbed. Okay. And the accent is too good.
Yeah.
Like, it actually, like, there's no way. He's in The Last Temptation of Christ going, hey, Jesus, get over here. We got some fish and loaves.
He's got his New York accent on in the middle of The Last Temptation. Yeah.
And here he's like speaking this inner Slavic language just like fluently.
Going hard. Yeah.
So yeah, that makes sense.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure. I thought I read that somewhere.
It just looked like it to me. I don't know it for sure.
For the record, yes, it was dubbed.
Okay.
All of the
thanks.
All of those actors, yeah.
Okay. Well, no wonder they all signed up for this. They're like, oh, it's based on a acclaimed novel, and I don't have to memorize any lines even. I can just show up and film my scene in a day.
Yeah.
And torture this kid.
Unbelievable.
Yeah.
I guess so. I guess if this is a good spot, my only other real note I had on this movie was a few of the vignettes. I think, if I'm remembering correctly, Stellan Skarsgård's and Barry Pepper's vignettes. had soft depictions of a Nazi. Um, if you know what I mean by that, where they don't necessarily all totally seem cruel, but they have like a human side to them. I did find those parts to be interesting, and just to make a vague film comparison, the only film I can think of that has a soft depiction of a Nazi character is Alfred Hitchcock's Notorious with Cary Grant and Ingrid Bergman. Claude Rains' character is a Nazi. He's a Nazi sympathizer, but he's shown it's a very soft depiction of a Nazi. And I don't know if you guys seen that movie.
Yeah, I have.
Okay, so Seth hasn't, you have. So it was just it was a vague comparison I made in my head because those two vignettes stuck out to me because of how those characters were shown. They had a little bit more nuance to them than just being bad guys shooting innocent people, you know.
Well, yeah, this Stellan Skarsgård, who he plays like a Nazi who's basically tasked with just taking the little Jewish boy out to kill him. And
right.
Yeah, and the same thing happens in the book where he's, being brought out there. The kid expects to be killed, and the guy lets him go. And it stands out in this context because nobody does anything like this in the movie as far as caring, for him until he's eventually ends up with like these Soviet soldiers who save the day. And so just the fact that that happens, that there is someone who shows mercy, even though we get no explanation for it, it at least stands out among everything else that we see. And again, even the scene itself,
still
they
just makes for a jagged picture,
right,
jagged tone.
Well, because they stare at, they just sit there and they stare profoundly at each other like everyone does in every scene of this movie, and then he lets him go and they don't talk about it. You don't get any sense of what's going on. So it still isn't that illuminating, although it definitely stands in, stark contrast to everything. And it is a little respite of kindness that happens there that is unexpected. But then again, with the way that this is structured, the very next scene, he's immediately captured by the Nazis again. And that's how he ends up with Priest Keitel.
Priest Keitel.
Yeah, which makes the whole thing seem like superfluous because he just has another vignette waiting for him, and I need something else to do with him with the Nazis, so he's just caught anyways.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's just one damn thing after another. I do at least want to talk about when Barry Pepper shows up. It's with these like Soviet soldiers, and there's a scene where the Cossacks arrive and literally like rape and pillage and burn a village, which I feel like is something that you could compare with the Come and See scene. It doesn't stand out here because every scene is like this.
It's at the same volume.
Yeah. And it's much more, again, in the book, it's a lot more like elaborate and significant. And the stuff is so over the top in the book. They're raping infants, and everyone is they're castrating the men and force feeding it to their family members. I mean, almost juvenile in how it's trying to do this stuff. But they did keep in the movie one of the most ridiculous things that happens in that scene, which is like this guy riding around on a horse showing how he can rape a woman while he's on a galloping horse. And they actually showed that in the movie.
Yes.
Maybe you skimmed by that part, Seth, but I was like, are you serious?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I'll come out and say it. At this point, I had tried 3 days in a row to not fall asleep or skim, and I don't know. I think I saw the end of this movie at some point.
Yeah.
I just was so bored and so just like, and I mean, I'm not just making like a lazy gesture either. I think that's like a thing about this podcast that I always try and extend to guests too. That like that's the thing about some of these. Some of these are kind of unwatchable. Some of these are just like not worth your time. Like I don't know, and that's how this one felt a lot. Like pretty early on, it like really hammered that into me. That just like it doesn't want me to even watch this or something.
Yeah.
I don't know. I just felt so dissuaded and I don't know, discouraged from putting any effort into this thing.
Yeah, I think you have basically like a million reasons not to waste your time on this particular movie, and then you have one really good reason, which is the cinematography. I mean, at least off the top of my head, that's the only thing I can think of. Where if you want to see something that's crisp, black and white, there's a million movies you could probably pick, but this would be one of those that I would throw in there. Though I'd probably agree with you, it's probably unwatchable. I don't know if we're at that part of the podcast yet.
Almost.
Okay.
I did think it was interesting that, and you probably missed this, Seth, since it was happening during all of this stuff here, but once the kid is...
All my sleeping.
Yeah, he was kind of rescued by the Soviets. The other, like, main guy he talks to besides Barry Pepper is the actor who played the kid in Come and See, which, again, is really inviting a comparison. And I don't know if I would have recognized him, but I knew that he was going to be there.
I forgot about that.
He kind of explains Stalin and what the like party means and stuff to him.
That's right.
Fucked up war cinematic universe.
Yeah. Yeah, and you know, obviously he's an adult now in this movie, but when you do something like that, that is such a way to transparently, you know, say like this is a successor to Come and See, and this is the same kind of thing that we're going for.
Yeah.
Yeah, you wish, bitch.
Yeah. But anyways, there's the whole thing with the kid looking up to the Soviet character and this super long drawn out scene where the Soviet character sets out to avenge some of his friends that were killed by villagers, and basically is a sniper and shoots them, you know, villagers, and he tells the kid, an eye for an eye, don't forget that. And apparently that's the whole point of the scene.
Yeah.
But I guess we're supposed to draw on that when this kid does get rescued and end up in like a school at the end of the movie, and he wears a Soviet uniform, and he himself then is like smacked by some merchant and then comes and gets revenge and shoots him, which I don't know, seems like not where the movie was heading, or almost like, again, they're searching for there to be some kind of an arc for this character.
Yeah.
But
well,
yeah,
I'll say that Udo
so I think Seth's falling asleep even now.
Oh, you guys are still there.
I'll say that
go ahead.
Udo Kier definitely agrees with you about an eye for an eye.
Oh, he does?
He does.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah. Good point.
Yes. And the only other thing, if we might as well compare the two leading boys, right? So like where Come and See had like the over the top facial expressions, the iconic like, you know, colors around his eyes. Painted Bird was like the total opposite. You had this kid that was, I mean, he might have had reactions sort of, but it mostly feels pretty faceless.
One has a name, the other one doesn't have a name.
The other one doesn't have a name. Yeah, so like obviously certain parts of that are done on purpose, but there's a clear distinction between how both character arcs are handled.
Yeah, this kid gives us nothing. You know, I don't want to harp on some child actor, but
yeah,
I think it becomes clear, especially when his father shows up and he does get taken back by his father, and there's this scene where they're sitting together at the dinner table.
Yeah, and
the kid is supposed to be expressing some kind of like, you know, alienation or being discontent with the situation, and it really just reveals that this kid isn't much of an actor. Like, and it's the rest of the movie, it just wants him to sit there being impassive or grimacing maybe. When they try to give him any kind of bit of acting to do, it's like, why did they even cast this kid? It's just 'cause they couldn't get anybody else to be in this movie. Yeah, I don't know. I think it's a huge contrast between these two performances.
It is.
I don't know. I heard about that scene on Wiki. Towards the end there.
Spark notes.
Seth spent 3 days and didn't even finish it.
Yeah.
I have not done that for any of these movies.
Well, I don't blame you.
I don't know.
I don't know. That you are living up to the title of your podcast.
I know.
Yeah,
I've been it happened. It happened.
You are killing it.
He unwatched it in the middle of the movie before even watching it.
I attempted.
Yes,
I attempted.
Yes.
So yeah, just to round it up here, and then the end is just him riding away on this bus with his father, and he sees the numbers from the concentration camp on his dad's arm, which I guess is supposed to mean something, and then the kid writes what's supposed to be his name on the window next to him, which by that point, if that's supposed to have some kind of importance or symbolism, I wasn't really engaged to try and figure it out.
Yeah.
In the book, he like loses his voice at some point during his experiences, and the end is him getting his voice miraculously back, but it's not clear why or what it signifies.
Well, that's probably
so it's just
It doesn't mean anything.
replacing one unclear metaphor with another.
Yeah, I mean, symbolism at that point, you can be grasping at straws, but I mean, I think that with losing the voice and gaining it again, that's got to be about the Jewish struggle, I would imagine.
Yeah,
right. I mean,
doesn't plant the seeds anywhere else in the book for it, but yeah, I think it invites like that, and the whole painted bird imagery metaphor. He like doesn't do anything with it in a way that also invites people to project this profound meaning onto it. And it's interesting that this book for a time was considered like a classic of Holocaust literature, and there's all of these quotes on it, plaudits from other authors, which I just do not understand. But all of them are from around when the book first came out. I feel like that it's kind of been lowered in estimation since then, and part of it was the author turning out to be so much of a fraud.
Yeah.
But I don't care if the book is real or autobiographical or not.
Yeah.
Like even if it was, it doesn't work. And I feel like the history has caught up with it, and it's not as remembered now. It's not considered as much of a classic, and this movie certainly isn't going to be either.
Well, I think that goes to the point I was trying to get to before with Come and See, about like how we don't want to forget about these events, but again, it's about matching the volume to a personal experience, right? So to people from people in the 1960s, this was still ringing so true to so many survivors and people who had gone to war. So I think that context is important, where what you just said, it doesn't matter if the actual content is autobiographical or real. I think the volume of these incidents probably matched the trauma that many of those people had suffered. And I think that's just one way to look at it. Does that make it right or wrong? I don't know if that matters. It's just an interesting way to think about it.
Sure, yeah. So many of those books are just about grappling with what has been, revealed about humanity's evil. And
yeah, I mean, you're talking 1965 also is what? That's 20 years removed from the war. So, or not even, went to the end of the war. So, I mean, you're talking like a really short period of time in the grand scheme of things.
Sure. And just for the record, this Kosiński he stayed with his parents the entire war. They did travel around and use some assumed names and stuff.
That's the whole thing.
But
he didn't see shit. He was fine.
Yeah. Instead of come and see, he didn't come or see, really.
No. Have you guys seen that guy?
There was no bird. There was no paint. None of this.
I don't know.
He has no right to rub my fucking nose and all this shit.
I don't know the name of him. I can't think of it, but it's a guy on Instagram, and he has a green screen behind him, and he pretends that he zooms into all his business meetings, but he's actually doing other things, like he's going water skiing, he's jumping out of an airplane, he's going to a baseball game. So it looks like he's in his office, but he's actually reacting and doing like all the crazy stuff that he's doing. It's kind of feeling like this is like it's a mask for something.
Kosiński was just water skiing the whole time.
The whole time.
Yeah.
And the book's the green screen for the time.
Yeah. So two very different discussions here. I would be happy to unwatch this movie. Seth already did, unless there's anything you want to add to that. Seth?
This is an episode of not watched it. Notables. I did it. Not watchables. Didn't watch it.
Unfinishables.
Fell asleepables.
Sure. But But yeah, is that? But I don't want to speak for you, Chris. Maybe they found some more of a redeeming value in how it was presented than we did.
I mean,
that's totally
I think
No shame.
I think I generally agree with you guys. It's not that I wouldn't unwatch it for the content. I think I would just unwatch it because I felt that it wasn't executed the way that, to the best of how it could have been done. What that is, I'm not sure. I just know that there are pretty severe critiques to how it was directed and how it all kind of flows, right? So I think I would unwatch it in that way, but not because of the content, if that makes sense.
I agree. Actually, I was surprised that it wasn't that hard to watch on that level. I didn't find it all that disturbing, and maybe that's because the way that it was presented was just so bloodless.
And you're a naughty boy.
And I'm a naughty boy. But I don't understand all these reports of people like storming out of the press screenings and then writing think pieces about it and, extreme, unwatchable art. And I feel like that's just giving this too much credit on all levels. It's not, it does kind of pull its punches. It seems kind of obvious to me in a lot of parts, like how they did stuff and when, what things they weren't showing just off frame, like it's some sort of like softcore movie or something. So yeah, I don't think it merits the unwatchable, even if you do like the movie.
That's a pretty fair take. That's a fair take.
I think it's pretty gross. I think it's very gross. Yeah, that is pretty gross.
Well,
and boring and dumb and
I guess
poopy.
I'm just disgusting. Yeah. All right. Well, on that note, Chris, I want to thank you so much for joining us. This was a blast and a great discussion, and I think these are really good picks.
Yeah.
And is there anything that you
anything
you want to plug or anything? I definitely want to tell everyone myself to go check you out on Letterboxd, Siglet_MIR. And see all of the reviews on there. If you use Letterboxd too, you do the collabs and everything. It's
yeah, I mean, I
very good stuff.
I appreciate that. Thank you guys for having me on. I appreciate the invite. Yeah, anyone who wants to check out what I write, I always appreciate people who read what I write. And I like to do collaboration with people just like yourselves on movies, just to talk about them. I like talking about movies, and that's that.
Let's do it. Let's collab sometime, Zig.
All right, man. Yeah, always happy to do it. And again, really, thank you very much for the invite.
Of course.
All right, absolutely.
Yeah, you guys
can say something, Tony.
No, I was just hanging out since we're at the end now.
All
Go
right.
back in your little rat hole,
party.
Tony.
Thanks for all your hard work.
Pay no attention to the man behind the curtain.
I need to change the fade out so that instead of just disappearing when I press the button, I just like dissolve. That'd be cool.
Yeah, you could do that in real life too. That'd
be cool.
Unwatchables is produced by Tony Scarpitti, hosted by me, Marc Dottavio, and Seth Troyer, with artwork by Micah Kraus. You can find Seth and I on Letterboxd under Marc Dottavio and Sloth Troyer. You can also check us out at unwatchablespod.com for links to our Twitter and Instagram, or support us on Patreon for bonus content and to have a say in what we watch. Thanks for listening.